Chris Harris is a former Yahoo and ESPN fantasy analyst who's now the owner of Harris Football and the host of the popular Harris Football podcast. He believes film doesn't lie, he sends fascist emails, he hates crutch arguments, and he might live on a yacht. These are his late round perspectives. You know, I realized after I had asked you to come on the show that we are facing each other in the Ekeler Invitational semifinal this week. And
good luck.
Yeah, it's hilarious because I have to preface this so that everyone understands what's going on here. So my team in that league is pretty trash, and I lost 3 of my first 5 picks it's a 14-team league, and when you lose, you get injuries and stuff. It's very, very rough, right? Meanwhile, Chris's team is just destroying everyone, undefeated right now. You're sitting with Josh Allen and Christian McCaffrey and Kenneth Walker, and Isaiah Pacheco's hopefully going to be healthy this week. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, please, can Jonathan Taylor just play with one hand? I'd really appreciate that, so I don't have to play Chris Rodriguez for a second straight week in this playoff. But somehow, as a 7 seed, because there's seven playoff teams in this league, somehow as a 7 seed, I beat Josh Norris last week, who had by far the better team. It's just one of those situations where, like, I didn't even think this, like, I didn't, like week 10, I'm like, okay, this team's done. Like, this just isn't going to be a team that I care about. And then now I'm sitting ready to just be absolutely annihilated by you here in week 16. So I hope you enjoy that W this week, Chris.
I mean, I'm trying to think of the number of times in the many, many, many years that I've had an undefeated team that actually won.
Yeah.
I don't know that I can ever remember such a thing.
Yeah.
I don't know that I can. I mean, usually you spit the bit.
Yeah. Yeah. There's usually, like, that's what I felt like last week with Norris. Like, I legitimately... Because, this is like a fun league. We're all playing with Austin Ekeler, that kind of deal. And I'm like, if I win this league somehow, sure, that'd be great. We all want to win. But at the same time, I'm like, I want the best teams to also do well, in these kinds of situations where there's not like tons of money on the line or anything like that. And for Norris, like, his team was really well put together. Like, he did a great job. It was a really strong team. He just happened to have a Dallas stack on that team with Dak and Tony Pollard, and like things just didn't go his way. And I had like Jordan Addison, who had done absolutely nothing or, not a lot for the last month and a half, and just completely blows up. And now, I'm not going to get that kind of performance against you again. That would just be insane luck and just very, very unlikely.
I had Harmon on so Matt Harmon's the one who put the lead together, and he was on my show Monday, and he was like, Ekeler wants you so bad in the finals. Like, yeah, bring it on, little man. He also said there's an actual like physical trophy they bought for it.
Oh, so I didn't know. Now I wish I would have cared a little bit more about that. Yeah.
So I don't want the thing. I'm like, if I win, can I send it to JJ?
Yes, you can send. Look, you can send it to the person that you beat by 60 points in the semifinals if you end up winning it. I will gladly get that 4th place trophy and display it behind me here. Be a fantastic addition. But yeah, man, I'm excited for you to be on the show. You and I have had a relationship for a while now, basically since you've kind of gone out on your own, which how long has it been since you left ESPN?
9 years, baby.
That's
9 years.
Insane.
Well, 9 seasons, I guess 8.5. It was 2015 summer.
That is
crazy. When I left ESPN, I didn't know anybody in the business. You're not allowed to. When you're at ESPN, they don't let you like do other shows, right?
Yeah.
So I put out the call, and you were one of like the second person who I think Andy Behrens was probably the first because I've known him since the 90s, and then you were probably the next one.
Yeah, so I had Andy on Perspectives a couple weeks ago, and he brought you up a little bit. We obviously just said horrible things about you. And so, he comes on, he talks about you, and we had talked earlier in the offseason. I really, really wanted you to come on the show because, we approach fantasy football in a little bit different ways, but I also think that listeners and folks who are consuming fantasy content probably unfairly bucket some analysts in different ways in the way that we are approaching the game. But first, before getting into some of that, let's just talk about your journey so that everyone's sort of on the same page. You have been around a while. Like I said, this is not an age joke or anything, Chris. I promise you that. You just, I am now old within the industry, which is wild to me because I remember I was like 23 years old when I was starting to do all this kind of stuff. But look, you've been around for a while. You had stops at some really, really big media companies and stuff. Just let us know sort of how you got into this space and what that adventure was like for you.
Adventure. My God. If it was an adventure, I hesitate to, I don't think that much. So I was in grad school for the second time. I got a creative writing, MFA in creative writing, because I wanted to be a fiction writer. And fortunately, it worked out. I have turned into a fiction writer. But you can't make a living doing that anymore. Yeah. So I was also doing some freelance writing and wound up going to Yahoo very, very briefly at Yahoo. And Brandon Funston was my boss, our mutual friend, Brandon Funston. And then Barry went to ESPN, and suddenly they were building out ESPN. And they said, hey, like, come to ESPN. We'll pay you what they're paying you, and we'll put you on TV. And I was like, I have a contract. And Brandon, to his eternal credit, I'll always thank him for this. He said, it's too good an opportunity. You need to go. It's fine. Wow. Like, go. Yeah. It's cool. And it was really, really nice of him. And actually, in exchange, did Behrens tell you this? In exchange, I said, hey, I know this guy named Danny Behrens, and that's how Behrens wound up at Yahoo.
Yeah, kind of. He did. Yes, he did. That was I think the reason that your name got brought up in the first place. And then that's before we started trashing you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no. I mean, and Behrens has been there all this time. My God.
Yeah.
He really should get a life. So then I was at ESPN for 8 years, and it was good, and then it was maybe somewhat less good. It just got frustrating. And so the last couple contracts, I was like teetering, do I want to come back? Listen, I mean, you always feel like an idiot complaining that you have a job where you're making money to go on television and talk about stupid things, really unimportant, stupid things. Like, you gotta, like, in the vast scheme of the world, that's not a hardship. But the years kind of started to feel like groundhog years, where every year was the same. My responsibilities weren't going to change. There was a lot of talk about my responsibilities changing, never really did. And in the end, the last time around, they offered, and I just said I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And I left, and didn't leave to start the thing that I wound up starting. I left just to leave. Like,
interesting.
My contract was up at the end of July of 2015, and if it had been like February of 2015, I would be a clerk somewhere. I don't know what I would be doing. I'd be doing something else, because I doubt I would have even started my own show. But because it happened to be at the end of prep, I used to write the magazine, like that print magazine that I wrote the whole thing. I wrote all the player profiles. And so like that was all in my head for 2015. And so I said, all right, well, I don't know how to make a podcast, and I don't know how to sell ads for a podcast. I don't know anything. I know how to talk. Yeah. That's it. And I learned how to do it. And I said, basically, like, I'll give myself this season, since I have the 2015 season in my head, I'll do a daily podcast. I'd had a show at ESPN that I like had to really like debase myself to get, that where they let me do 2 days a week. But JJ, I don't know if you know this, but any more than that, that would have been 2 podcasts that would have been like, can you imagine having
2?
Who has the production resources to have 2 podcasts on a massive media enterprise? Like, can't, if they'd been a little more on the ball, they'd have 2 of the 5 most popular fantasy shows in the world, but so I left and learned how to do all the things you need to do to make a show. And my presumptive scenario was I would be at November 12th or something, and I would feel like, okay, I've made a go of it. 7,102 people are listening, and that's lovely, but it's not enough to sustain a show. And it's a bummer because I promised that I'd finish the rest of the show, but the season, I have to go make a bunch more shows, but it's a failure. And in January, I'll wind up doing something else. And instead, within like 3 weeks, suddenly, I had a really big audience. It was also 2015. Like, my mom didn't know what a podcast was.
I was actually about to say that you did that early, to the point where, obviously I left FanDuel a couple years ago, and I don't think that I would have had even remotely the confidence to do that if not for someone like you and then others who have sort of gone out on their own. And
Mm.
I like when you did it, it was not an easy, like for me to do it, it was kind of easy. Like it wasn't that, realistically, yeah, it was kind of a difficult decision because it's like, it's a jump you're going on your own. But it's like I've seen other people succeed in doing this, and I already had this backbone of the podcast and stuff already sitting there for me to help me, and I knew the kind of numbers I was doing with that and feeling good about it. But you doing that when you did that, what had to have felt pretty scary to some degree. Like I know that you say that like you at least you had this like ambiguity of what was going to go on in my life after leaving ESPN.
Sure, but like I'm being truthful when I say I left to leave.
Yeah.
I left because it had run its course, and
Yeah.
no offense intended to anybody there, just had run its course. It's all good, it's fine. And but like I left to leave, and I had like I have an MBA and I have an MFA in creative writing, and like I have enough. I'm employable.
Yeah, right.
I'll figure something out. I was living in Amherst, Massachusetts. I owned my house. Like I was going to probably be all right.
Yeah.
I didn't like. The hardest part was just saying, hey, here's this job that, many people think they would kill to have, and you're saying you're going to leave it. And that was the scariest part. That was the thing I wrecked over. It wasn't so much to start the show, because starting the show was a much secondary thought. Like, as it turns out, I should have left 3 years earlier. Like, I should have left, it's worked out. JJ, I can't tell you. It's worked. I live on a yacht, for heaven's sake.
Right. People forget. Yes.
Yeah, people forget I live on a yacht. But no, it worked out well, and like, but I didn't have anxiety about the show as much as I did about just, I guess I'm doing this. I have to listen to what my brain is telling me rather than what the people will think. He's crazy for having left that job,
Yeah. Well, the kind of content that you were doing for ESPN is naturally going to be different than the kind of content that you do on your own. I mean, it was the same. I probably had more flexibility and freedom with what I was doing at FanDuel, and even I felt, hey, I can do a little bit more of this, or I really want to publish this prospect guide and do more with that, where I can't necessarily do that under this larger umbrella. You definitely approach the game of fantasy football different than a lot of other analysts. And I don't say different in a bad way whatsoever. I say that in the most respectful way possible, like genuinely. How did you, because, you look at film and break down film for those who might not be familiar with your work as much, but, you break down film way more than the vast majority of fantasy analysts. The vast majority of fantasy analysts are sitting in their mom's basement looking at spreadsheets. And you're on a yacht.
I'm on a yacht.
Watching film. You're on a yacht watching film, right? Yeah. How did you get to the point of having the confidence that you have in your film watching ability to then go out there and say, hey, this is how I feel about this player. This is what you should do in fantasy. Right. Where did you learn all that too?
So I'll say, my favorite sport growing up was baseball. My first fantasy experiences were fantasy baseball, and the thing that I thought I was going to be doing probably more at ESPN when I went there was probably more baseball. I was doing both baseball and football, and football hadn't really exploded yet, like it was about to, but it hadn't really like lapped baseball to the extent that it would in a year or two. And the way we covered baseball was correctly not worrying so much about the raw home run totals or the raw save totals or whatever. It was a lot more like, the rudiments of sabermetrics, the rudiments of the things that were all way batting average and balls in play. That started to get known, and then all anybody in that space did was be like, don't worry, his batting average and balls in play is still fine. He'll be okay. And that's now, so in other words, numbers were the answer with baseball. That was your path to being a good analyst, because it's such a simple, repeatable batter on pitcher 600 times a year kind of thing that just usually the numbers come out. And when they don't, you go, that was weird, but it's 5 guys and everyone else, their numbers worked, so we're good. And I don't mean to demean analytics in baseball. That's why it works, because and there are new analytics and there are different ways of looking at it. And like, I think the data is where baseball is at. So it's natural that everybody who'd been, I think most people, maybe not your age, but most people like my age and a little bit younger, maybe cut their teeth more doing fantasy baseball. And it was natural to start applying the way that you analyzed fantasy baseball to fantasy football. And so I just remember so many dumb arguments in these rooms at ESPN going, but his yards per carry is so good.
Yeah.
This is before there were sensors in pads, but even that I am somewhat skeptical of. We'll get to that. So early on covering football at ESPN, I was like, there's something missing here. The thing that I always would hear, it's funny, Scott Fish was on my show Tuesday, and we were doing waivers, and we were, pretty simple show. You've done that show on my show several times. And like, he goes, now this game I watched. This one, he was talking about, Chase Brown. He was like, I still would add Chase Brown. I know numbers didn't look good, but I watched this one and I saw him. And I was like, welcome to my side. Right. Because the way people talk about it is always like, yes, the numbers say this, but this is one that I got to see. And that, and I think, therefore, counterintuitively, this is what it looked like. And I would hear that a lot, and I would think that a lot, and eventually got to the point where I was like, it would be great as if you saw everything. Yeah. If you just watched everything. Yeah. And so at the last few years of ESPN, that's what I started to do. I started to be able to watch everything. Yeah. I don't think that's that like Barron's watches every game.
Yeah, I do too.
In the course of a week.
For the record, I do
you
too.
You watch every game during a week. Jim McCormick watches every game in a week. Where the difference, the craziness comes in is that I do it by Tuesday morning. I basically make my Monday and Tuesday shows be about that weekend's film. So you're going to have heard from somebody who watched the game on every single game by Tuesday morning. And I don't, that's really the only difference. That's the main difference. And like, I think as far as like how you got good at knowing when a player was good and how you got good at knowing when a player was bad, I think your answer is probably going to be exactly the same as mine, which is that you watch enough. Yeah. And you just can't help it. Like you don't, it doesn't have to be like super skilled. You just go, I've seen it all. I've seen every single stupid game. Like I know that guy looks different. And I think that's really all it boils down to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Even through data, when you see things and when regression could be coming, or if a player is seeing a certain workload over and over and over again and people are getting really frustrated, I mean, there's still that sort of like back of your head, yeah, this is still going to be possible for this player just because I've seen this play out so frequently. I think you're really correct with the, like, sometimes we don't need to just answer and say, this is definitively how I know, or this is the process of exactly how I know, when you've just been doing it for a really long time. If you've just been watching this stuff for a while and you have a track record too, it's not like you're stepping into the fantasy space for the first time and no one's heard of you before and you're just like, trust me, bro, I know what I'm doing here. It's a little bit different, but if you have a track record of, being successful and showing that success, I think that's important too. Was there anyone, this is out of curiosity, was there anyone at ESPN? Because obviously resource wise, there's a lot at ESPN. But was there anyone there that helped you at all, like learn the game better, or was it really just an individual journey on your end?
Yeah, it wasn't anybody. It was just me. I mean, at the time, through most of my tenure there, fantasy was a very ugly stepchild and to be scoffed at. Like I spent Sundays in Bristol for too many years that I don't want to remember. Yeah. And Herm Edwards one time in the war room when we were watching the games, like saw me in a nice suit because I would do TV before I would watch the games, right? And like at the end of the season, he made some like whatever. Herm is what he is. Like, you fantasy all this time you've been fantasy. And I gotta tell you, I didn't say anything in that room. But like, there was basically not a happy relationship really between like the real football guys and the fantasy football guys, which I don't know if it's changed. It's been a long time. It's possible. The fact that Field, who's a great guy, is both a newsbreaker and the fantasy host is good. It probably brings the bridge together, and Field's just a wonderful guy. Yes. Like, so
amazing person.
So yeah, I was not aided. I was not aided. No.
Yeah, I was just curious. So going back to sort of the data and film thing, let's just throw this out there because it irritates the living what out of me. Like it's one of the most frustrating things with the way that people consume content and sort of bucket analysts in these certain ways and talk about analysts. there are a group of people who say, oh, you're a film guy, which sure, if you were to describe yourself, you'd say, yeah, I'm breaking down film. This is what I'm doing. And this is the way that and they'll say, oh, JJ has models. Like he's this nerd. Again, I'm one of the people living in my parents' basement. But I really get frustrated because it's not, you just mentioned, like, it's not like I'm not watching this stuff, because I think it's incredibly important to still go that route and still understand what you're saying. I don't want to sound like a moron when I hop on shows and I start talking about some player who doesn't, the numbers don't match what I'm just seeing. Right. And so I have to ask you, like, how you, from like a process standpoint, clearly you're not just ignoring numbers completely. Clearly, you know what's going on from a target share perspective or what have you. How do you sort of mesh those worlds together, and how are you, I know this is a really, really high level and loaded question for sure, but how are you sort of bringing those worlds together?
I mean, I probably don't as much as you do. That's the honest truth, is that I probably try to be as untainted by numbers as I physically can. But of course, it always works its way in. I would never have had you on my show if I didn't think you watched football. Like, that's the whole thing. You've done Monday shows on my show where you can't do them anymore because you have a child. But back in the day when you had time. When you had time, you used to come on my Monday show where it was not data at all. JJ, what are 3 games you want to watch? And we'll just talk about what happened in the 3 of them. You remember those good old days, right?
Yeah, man. Of course. Of course.
Yeah. You can't do it anymore. I wish you could, because you're great at it, because you do watch football. So I think you're a little more the blender than I am of marrying the best of both worlds. I am not so much. I mean, of course, I'm looking at the actual production itself. I'm looking at snap share. I'm looking at target share. I'm doing the basics, but you can miss me. Not you. Anyone can miss me on, like, he reached a maximum miles per hour of this. Like, I just don't care. And I'm deeply suspicious, honestly, of like expected points added per play. Deeply suspicious. Deeply suspicious. So, I'm gonna say, other than the obvious stuff, I'm probably not marrying as much data as you are, and I'm definitely not modeling anything at all.
Yeah.
But like, anybody who is working with data models and watching football, the way I view that is very positive. I view that as, that's creating a rubric and then allowing the actual facts of the case to break the rubric, because the biggest difference between covering baseball in this way and covering football in this way is that past performance doesn't necessarily indicate future returns. It just doesn't. Like, baseball, it just does, and football, it just doesn't. All the models and stuff like that, they do a wonderful job of describing what happened. But the problem is that what happened is freaking chaos.
Yeah.
What happened is 11 on 11 madness, where if the left defensive end falls down, I don't have a way to account for that in any data. Like, there's a ridiculous, the Denver defense in week 3 against Miami, giving up 70 points and letting Devon Achane go for 50 fantasy points. It's really hard to get a model that doesn't go, wow, Devon Achane's amazing at football. He's so good. And so that's why I don't mind a model that tells you that, but that's why they need the JJ. They need the person sitting in front of the model that goes, yeah, but, like, I gotta tell you, the Denver defense was pretty bad then, and now it's pretty good. And if he were playing against them now, it probably wouldn't be. That's essentially, if people didn't need you, then they would just use the model. Everybody could do the same thing. The point is, you put the work in, and then you can go, here's the model saying. However, I'm just going to warn you, I saw that, and it's maybe not the complete truth.
Yeah, this is exactly why I wanted to bring you on, because I feel like, I mean, you're sort of giving me the outlet to talk about this, if I'm being honest.
Sure, do it.
But it's one of those things where one of the most tilting things that I see is, again, going back to the bucketing of, you're watching film, you're the nerd. Okay. There's these two separate buckets. For some reason, film guys are always the guys who
are the cool ones.
Yeah. The popular ones, the ones who look awesome. But there is so much bad data analysis out there. That's my problem with it. It's not that data analysis is bad. I mean, obviously, I think data analysis is brilliantly good if you know what you're looking for and you know what you're doing. I think that no greater example of this, Chris, is with running backs in particular, because there are quarterbacks at least are controlling so much of the game, and they can overcome certain situations. Obviously, every player is dependent on thousands of factors, whether you're talking personnel on the field, you're talking schematic stuff, you're talking even the way that coaches are handling things, whatever. I mean, there's just so many different factors for every single player. But the way that I've sort of broken this down is that, a quarterback obviously controlling the most of a game. They're doing the most on the field than any other player, because they're touching the ball 35 plus times a game. And then you go to wide receiver, for instance, and I do think wide receiver data is a little bit stickier than, let's say, running back data, because in order to, and I'm not saying that it's perfect or flawless, but at least wide receivers, in order to earn target share, in order to get the volume, you have to get open and you have to do things independently of what's going on. But then again, you have to fall back on scheme and you have to fall back on quarterback play a little bit. Like, there's still other factors involved. I go back to running back all the time, though, because there are so many things that have to go right or wrong for a running back in order for us to see whatever the end stat line is. And so, I can sit here and say, I try to evaluate running back talent, of course. I do it both through what I'm just visually seeing and then sort of what the data's saying. But I'll be honest, when I'm looking at advanced metrics at running back, I don't really care. I don't care that much about what this guy is doing. I will sometimes compare and contrast versus teammates, because you get somewhat of an apples to apples comparison. I say somewhat because there are going to be players who are satellite backs and on the field in a lot more favorable situations than guys who are seeing stack boxes on early downs and what have you. But really, I mean, like, look at Rachaad White this past year. People were fading Rachaad White, and you can fade him for whatever reason. I'm saying the reason for fading, that's the crux here. The reason for fading was because his advanced metrics were bad last year on the ground. He was always fine as a receiver, but on the ground, his advanced metrics didn't look that good, especially when compared to a Leonard Fournette type. And the issue I had with that is, if you're going to compare him to his teammate and they look fairly comparable from teammate to teammate, maybe situation had something to do with that. Maybe there is something going on with the Bucs offensive line, and then you watched them last year and the Bucs offensive line got absolutely zero push, and they were getting zero push also at the beginning of this season. And so I think that, just to wrap this all up, I think that running back in particular is just a great example of just rough data analysis that's out there. And I always tell people, when I'm analyzing through data, use this as a guide. This is not the end all. This is not my prospect guide that I publish is all analytical. The whole thing that I publish is purely analytical. But my model didn't love Puka Nacua, but in my blurb, I wrote about liking Puka Nacua and not necessarily just taking what the model says and just running with it, because there's a lot more to this game than just looking at that data.
Yeah, I mean, you could say it, JJ. You're fooling people. You're tricking people with data. You're hoodwinking them. It's okay. You can admit it. No, I mean, yeah, I of course am kidding, and I don't know. I wouldn't have you on my show, and wouldn't have like a professional relationship with you if I didn't think you also understood football. The point of it is the way you feel, the way you want to shape the beginnings of your arguments are by putting a lot of numbers into some complicated models that you've developed, and then it comes out with some thoughts. And if that were the end of the thoughts, I think your fans wouldn't need you. Right. But that's not the end of the thoughts. The most important part comes next, which is you interpreting the data, deciding that's maybe going to trick you. No, I'm going to stand by that. That seems good to me. And you're always going to filter it through the lens of what you've seen yourself. Yeah.
One of the really interesting things too is that, like I said, you approach the game different than other analysts, because a lot of other analysts are analyzing through data. There's a low-key advantage to not then analyzing through data, because the market and the way that people are drafting, if you will, especially like rookie drafts, for instance. There was 2 years ago when Chris Olave was coming out. I don't know. You might have no idea that this battle even existed, Chris. So
I don't.
This is gonna make you sick at your stomach. So 2 years ago. Okay. So there is early declare status, right? A guy either declares early for the NFL draft or he doesn't. There is some signal for wide receivers in particular who declare early, and them declaring early, they're they're better as fantasy assets in the NFL. Now, you can take a step back and you can then think about the narrative around that, right? Where, okay, you're declaring early, you're probably more talented, of course, versus a guy who's declaring later. And so, yeah, you would get some signal. The problem is not understanding that there is some signal there. It's then taking that and running with that to some absurd degree and then fading Chris Olave as a result of it. You know, like a guy who, you know, it's still, and that's where the modeling can really be impactful too, where a lot of people are just like looking at different inputs and they're saying, oh, he's not an early declare. He's now not part of my consideration set during this rookie draft because I don't need this player if he played 4 years in college. But, you know, with the modeling, at least you're saying this is the proper way to weight this thing, this aspect. And then obviously layering on top what the market's saying or what other film watchers are saying and going, you know, that route with it too. And it's fine to lean on other analysts and with that kind of thing. I don't think there's any problem with that if you're not, you know, necessarily the best at analyzing through film. And so I just, it's crazy that, you know, there's one metric like that, which there are a plethora of reasons as to why a guy would or would not. Now with NIL, it's completely different, you know, with guys staying in college and stuff, but it was a really real thing. And people were not drafting Chris Olave because he stayed in school for an extra year. It's very real. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I will just say as I've grown in this industry and as, you know, the industry has just gotten so big, a lot of bad analysis. There's a lot of very bad ADP numbers. Every year, there are just so many dumb, bad ADP numbers that are so easy to take advantage of. And this year, it happened to be rookies. You know, just all the rookies went too early because, and then all the players who were the other position, the same guy on their same position on the same team that drafted them also were like, well, you can't want Ken Walker. Why would you want Ken Walker? And I was like, because he's awesome. I don't know. That's a good reason. So like, yeah, there's a lot of bad analysis out there. No question.
So you kind of talked about your weekly process a little bit, how so okay, Sunday happens, Sunday ends. Yeah. What are you then doing? Like it's Sunday night, the game's about to start. Are you doing anything on Sunday or is it all after that game? I guess you're in the West Coast most of the time throughout the season. Yeah. So you have that advantage, which I'm a little bit jealous of, but
no, it's unbelievable. Yeah. I don't know what I was doing all those years.
Yeah, I feel that way. I feel that way, especially with kids now where I'm like, I got to get up at 6 a.m. now, no matter what, because this is just their schedule. I do kind of wish that I had that extra 3 hours, but how are you approaching then watching this stuff, you know, after games conclude?
Well, it starts during games. So I'm usually behind because I'm making notes like crazy. So I would say there's 2 levels to film analysis in my show. What I do, people listen to my show who are watching this. Hi, you know this. There's reviewing the game. That's literally just me watching the game. I'm not pausing it. I'm not ISOing. I don't have any means. I'm watching the game broadcast. I can't ISO. I can't watch all the routes that Chris Olave ran because they don't show it on the Fox broadcast or whatever.
Right.
So there's the stuff that I do like midweek or later in the week. That's when I'll take one player, watch everything he's done the entire season. And that's like a breakdown of that person's my thoughts about him, not related to each individual game. So Sunday I'm behind, I'm making notes, I'm watching whatever's over the broadcast. I'm picking out like the most fruitful potential games to stream. That solution for streaming changes every year, but hopefully now it's on YouTube for a while because now I've got to process again, figured it out. So by the time Sunday night comes, I've usually watched 6 games, 7 games, something like that. And it's time for me to work up, write. You know, I got to write. I'm writing a lot of what I am going to say, not in full sentences, but I got to have my thoughts figured out. Right. So I'm outlining, I'm figuring out what to say on the show on Monday morning, because Monday's show is going to consist of all the games that I was able to watch on Sunday. And, then I have a guest and they pick 3 games. So I make sure I've watched those 3 games too. So I could talk about that. So that takes care of Sunday. I wake up very early Monday morning, 5:30, make the show. It's usually done by like 7:38. And then it's whatever I didn't watch on Sunday, I got to watch in arrears. I watch them, on stream them. It's usually 4, 5, 6 games in time for Monday night. Then I watch Monday night along with everybody else. And then again, I've worked up what I'm going to say about those games on Tuesday. And then a lot of Tuesday's show is wrapping it up with all the games that I didn't talk about on Monday, and then do waivers. And then from Wednesday on, it's a little more of a typical grind. It's like, you and Barons and everybody who's Pianowski, all the people who are going to watch the games, you guys just do it at a more sane pace. I've spent like 16-hour days probably with nothing but football in my face. It's crazy.
That is a lot.
No sane person should do this.
Yeah, I would never do that. I would never do that.
No, it's so much. But I have a yacht because of it. By the way, I don't have a yacht.
Yeah, just so everyone's clear, he does not have a yacht.
I do have a yacht possum. I do have a yacht possum. I from that point, it's making 3 more shows. It's doing some film breakdown, but having a guest on talk about ranks, from that point forward, it's more recognizable as what everybody else's routine is like. But my Sundays and Mondays, I'm really ready for them to be over because it's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, that is a lot. I can't imagine doing that to kick off the week. And mine is like the opposite basically, where I'm doing data collection early in the week, and then as the week sort of goes on, I'm watching a little bit more and more. And it's a little bit frustrating because my biggest podcast and column that I do is the 15 transactions one, where I'm telling people to buy, sell, and stuff. And I haven't always gotten to everything at that point. And it's tough with the fantasy schedule because everything's really, really truncated to like the very beginning parts of the week. You got to get your waivers ready. You got to get them done. People are so thirsty for them. And a lot of it is because the platforms have the default at Tuesday to Wednesday, for waivers. And I would love if it would make analysts' lives a little bit easier if the default were to be, Wednesday to Thursday, which is very doable. I don't know why it's not the default, but
JJ, it would take my yacht away. I wouldn't be happy with that.
Exactly. So, you've talked about your process a little bit. You've obviously had a track record of success. Everyone has blind spots though. Everyone is not, no one's perfect. Where do you think where do you think your biggest blind spot is with the way that you approach things?
I don't think I could say that, it's definitely this kind of player or this. I don't think I have one, except for what I'll describe in a second, because I really, really, really try to go into watching every single game. I always say it on my show, I'm an eyeball. Mm-hmm. I'm trying not to come in with it saying, well, I like Josh Jacobs, so anything he does, if he lifts his little pinky, I'm going to be like, oh, swoon, Josh Jacobs.
Yeah.
I'm really just going to try to be honest about what I saw in that game.
Yeah.
And I think if you have that, if you come in with as few axes to grind as possible, you will do the best job possible. But in terms of trying to predict whether something unexpectedly good that happened will continue or something unexpectedly bad that happened won't continue, I think it falls back to like film model breakers. It's not stat model, it's like film model breakers. It's guys who aren't doing it in a way that you're really familiar with as a consistent mode of success in the NFL. Mm-hmm. Derrick Henry is my best example of this.
And same from a data perspective. So this is perfect. Yeah.
Derrick Henry. Well, I mean, Austin Ekeler's a good one. I don't know. Like, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown's kind of a good one.
Yeah.
Even though I still suspect that Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to become a number 2 on a Super Bowl type winning offense. I think he's really, really good, but I think he's like more like Edelman. Mm-hmm. And like, there's a reason they drafted Jameson Williams, because they feel like they need, you could still have Amon-Ra be your number 1, but maybe not a fantasy number 1 if you had the outside receiver. Let's not go down that path right now. But these are players whose abilities that I see on film don't usually lead to protracted success. In Henry's case, he spent like 5 years of his professional life with the first 3 quarters in like most of his games, maybe a lot of his games, if not most, floating around.
Yeah.
Just, like a balloon trying to find a window, like falling down, and he'd be at, 17 carries for 43 yards. And you're like, yeah, this guy's bad. And then the fourth quarter, just because he is a rule breaker and is in, I think the size is probably less to do with it, as this guy's cardiovascular apparatus, this pulmonary apparatus must just be.
He is literally built different.
Unprecedented. Yeah. Because inevitably he would, on the 23rd carry, break one. It kept happening and happening. And I kept going, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It kept happening. And so, yeah, I think maybe it's guys who are doing it in ways that I'm not so familiar with. And usually, I got to be honest, usually when I say someone is doing it in a way that I'm not so familiar with, usually they crap out. Usually I'm right. But if I miss on guys like on stars, on guys who wind up being, first, second, third round fantasy picks, it's because of that. They have something that doesn't look like a traditional good player at their position.
Yeah. And sometimes, like if that's happening for me from like a data perspective, let's say, sometimes, it's fine to just say like, this is what generally happens. But this guy has been breaking this generally happens mold for a really long time at this point. And, we just have to recognize that this could just be a different, like with the Derrick Henry thing, this could just be a different scenario that I'm not going to change. A lot of people see a single result and they're like, oh, you got to change your process now, Chris. You got to watch film differently. But I think it's really, really important for people to understand that when there are these one-off examples of Derrick Henry being Derrick Henry and having the career that he's had, doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. Like it's fine to still recognize that, my process has gotten me to XYZ. This is just some separate thing that's happening that, yeah, I might be wrong about it, but I'm not going to really change the overall, the body of work here because Derrick Henry has a great heart. It's very, very, very hard for that to happen.
Yeah. Like I would say, Christian McCaffrey for years with Carolina, like not a dude that I would personally be giving 30 touches to in a game. Still not a dude. Like it's worked out this year. And I mean, I had the first pick in the Austin Ekeler league and I
took him.
Took McCaffrey. He's been pretty good. Like, so I'm not telling you that I was disrespecting him or whatever, but like, I think it's a bad path to, I think Christian McCaffrey would be safer, better fantasy asset if he averaged 18 touches a game.
Yeah.
And it's, when it was Carolina, when it was just him, it was really, it was like, boy, oh boy, are you sure you want to do this? Cause he's going to get the crap beaten out of him. With San Francisco, he is taking less punishment because they have so much wide open space. But I still don't think I would be treating him that way.
Yeah. Let's get into some player takes. We've been talking just sort of theory so far. Let's talk some individual players. We've been talking about Austin Ekeler. We've mentioned him like 40 times so far throughout this conversation. Yeah. He's been rough the last like month or so, especially. Have you seen visually a decline in his game versus previous seasons? You said that he was a player that you've just kind of been, not necessarily, when you watch him, seeing the production aspect and seeing how he's so good in fantasy or has been so good in fantasy over the last 3 years or so. Have you seen any sort of decline this season, especially maybe after that high ankle?
I think not, honestly. Like, I think if the way it's manifested itself is the way that they're choosing not to use him, and it's really hard to see on film, like, what they're not doing. Oh, it's just jazz. It's the notes you don't hear. So they've decided clearly not to throw to Austin Ekeler very much. And I can very much imagine that's related to injury, that he just doesn't really want to be in space. Yeah. Not doesn't want to, like his ankle doesn't want him to be in space and like have to make all the adjustments you have to make in space and go hard and go fast and then take hits from the side and all that stuff that happens in space. Because it couldn't be any clearer. They're not using them that way, right? It's crazy. It's like been the one reliable thing about Austin Ekeler his whole life in the league has been, they're going to give him 10 targets. And when they consistently give him 3, you go, huh. But that's hard to know why. All you know is it's not happening.
Yeah, right.
He's never been a great between the tackles runner. It's always been more of a keep him honest kind of thing and not a huge part of his game. And frankly, another dude who's way better off when they're not giving him 20 plus touches. It's clear in his career. He's way better off. Like if they've been scrambling around for a second running back for years, trying different guys. And, I wouldn't say Josh Kelly. I think Josh Kelly's rookie year, he was terrible. I think these last 2 years he's been okay and had some bad numbers and some fumbles that are not acceptable. Isaiah Spiller just seems like they've decided can't play because he can't get out in the field. They just can't find another guy. But I got to be honest, I'm not seeing like, he used to make that guy miss and he doesn't anymore. I mostly, he's also trapped in disaster space. There's nobody else you're worried about. My God. And then Keenan Allen doesn't play in a game. Like, who are you going to key on? So I'm going to say at full health, either with the Chargers or maybe more likely with another team next year, I'm not going to want him to be like an RB1, I don't think. But I don't think I'm going to say, well, no, the dude's skills have completely fallen off the table.
Yeah, really interesting too. And I think this gives credit to the injury speculation and that being a reason for the lack of like target share and stuff. I mean, they've had so many injuries on that offense, and the fact that we haven't seen, because even if you look at his splits historically, like when Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are both out, his target share spikes like crazy, right? And then if one of them are in,
not now.
Yeah, right. And it's not now. And you have to say, like, why is that not happening? And that makes sense, right? That would be a logical reason as to why. Another player who, again, you could also argue with Ekeler is that there's not a lot of competition going on within that offense. So defenses can very easily try to take that check down away a little bit more because they're not worried about Quentin Johnston and what he's been doing this season.
It's true. But I would say, just like you can argue that the other way. You
Exactly.
can say, yeah, but he should still be getting 17 targets. Like that doesn't
100%.
necessarily mean one argument or the other.
Yeah, I also think that a lot of teams defensively and schematically would gladly just give checkdowns, and they do a lot of times versus a down the field throw to an open receiver. But I say that because Stefon Diggs is another player who obviously has the talent, right? It's obviously there, but look at the surrounding cast with him. And they've needed a 2 for a really long time. They haven't had a very reliable guy there. I mean, Gabe Davis has shown flashes, but he's just not that dude at all. And so I want to ask you why he's been, despite that, Stefon Diggs has been playing with Gabe Davis now for a few years. It's not like this has been a new thing where they haven't had this second option. If anything, now they have at least an interesting option in Dalton Kincaid they can move around. I still think Khalil Shakir is not that terrible of a player out of the slot. But regardless of that, we haven't seen a stretch like this from Stefon Diggs at all. And I have to ask you, is he okay?
So I'm going to be completely honest and say I haven't done like advanced film work. And advanced, what that means. Like I haven't done the thing that I said that I do if I go take a 4-game sample size and watch every route.
Right.
I haven't done that. All I've done is been watching the game broadcast as it goes along. And sometimes the hardest thing you can just figure out is why the ball isn't even going to a guy when you're watching the broadcast.
Right.
All you know is, it's been a quarter and they haven't thrown a ball to Stefon Diggs yet.
Right.
That's troublesome, but also hard to diagnose. You really do need to go back and do the Matt Harmon thing, right? Matt is reception perception. Matt breaks down every single route. And like, I can't do that for every player. Matt's crazy. He does. So like, I will do that for Stefon Diggs at some point this summer and look at this winter rather, and look at this bad stretch and see if I can figure out, did something go wrong? He is elderly. He is 29, right? Did he just turn 30 maybe? Like he's getting close. He's on that border, but if we were having this conversation 5 weeks ago, people would be like, what? He's been unbelievable. What are you talking about?
Right.
So probably this comes down to much, much more the offensive coordinator change, the sort of rededication to running, to maybe a pounding into Josh Allen's head that a double covered Stefon Diggs isn't someone you should be throwing to, even though it's worked for you in the past. We want you doing something else instead. Realizing we should also that like the Dallas game isn't a good measurement of anything because Josh Allen didn't throw the ball. Like there's no throwing. Not going to blame Diggs for that. There's just no reason to throw. They ran it 87 times. Like Dallas couldn't stop it. So, people are going to have to make a decision here going forward. I think I would have a hard time not going down, like benching Stefon Diggs and playing, I don't know, like Drake London, and being like, yeah, cool. I would not be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think from like an actual utility perspective, like no one's benching Stefon Diggs. We're at the point in the season where you can't bench Stefon Diggs, even if it's one of those things where it would be very tough to live with that decision. If he then goes off on your bench, that's just a very difficult, thing to. But I do think that when we have a very clear change in something offensively, where in this case Ken Dorsey getting fired and Joe Brady stepping in, when there's this clear like divide and change, I don't think that we should necessarily and you definitely did not say this, but we definitely should not brush it off as nothing. Like oh, it's just variance that Stefon Diggs isn't doing anything right now, no big deal. Well, they're using James Cook is being targeted at twice the rate that he was being targeted. And it's literally the defining line is when they changed offensive coordinators. They're using their running backs, not just in the run game, but in the passing game too more. And I think that realistically, like that kind of shift in game plan can be a little bit more forced when you're talking about the running back, where, running backs are just getting these cheaper dump offs. It's not like they like have to run these crisp routes to get open all the time and such. When there's this very clear distinction, that's where I think there is some reason to believe that, I'm not saying in week 16 and 17, Diggs is going to fall flat, but I'm saying that I do think the coordinator change has made Stefon Diggs probably a little bit more volatile than he was before. Do you think that there's any sort of reason to believe that?
It's probably a blend of necessity being the mother of invention and the Bills having been like way outside the playoff hunt and needing to do something really different. And so a mandate coming to say, okay, in the short window, Stefon, you're just going to need to bite the bullet. Yeah. You're just going to need to understand you're not going to get the ball as much because we need to do something radically different because we're in trouble and we have to surprise teams. Did anybody think the Bills are going to be able to run the Cowboys like that? No. Some of it is variance. Some of it is just weird game flow variance where the Bills are a 2-point favorite or whatever it was and won by 100. That's just weird and not Diggs' fault at all. But sure, I mean, in the end, it's how many angels are dancing on the head of a pin because we're in mid-December and we're not telling. I mean, I'm ranking Stefon Diggs below where I had him ranked earlier. Right. I was ranking him 5 among receivers the first 3 months of the year, 2 months of the year, and now I'm ranking him 15. But I don't know how you're sitting wide receiver 15.
Yeah, I mean, think about the week 5 Buffalo Bills facing this Chargers defense. Stefon Diggs would arguably the wide receiver 1, right? Like that's how we would probably be ranking him in at least like in that Tyreek range, right? And now you're like, well, I mean, look at the way things have been trending, and I mean, last week I don't really look at last week as anything significant when you throw the ball, when the team throws the ball 15. They had 7 completions in that game. Yeah. Like, how do you really take that much away from like a game script perspective and stuff? But I mean, in a game plan perspective, but it's a very, very interesting case, at least. You mentioned rookies and rookies sort of falling flat. My thing with rookies this year has been a lot of the early round guys. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs, obviously second half of the season has bounced back. I have Bijan Robinson against you this week. And you're probably hoping, not that it matters because you're going to steamroll me anyway, but you're probably...
This is the verbal sandbag.
It's just going to be awful. But you're probably hoping that Bijan plays 30% or 50% of the team snaps like he did last week and is barely used. And to be honest, I didn't think that Bijan looked very good last week. It was probably his worst game. I know that his stat line shows that and his peripheral show that, but he had that bad fumble that forced him off the field. They just did not use him after that fumble, which is another thing that we could probably rant about for days. But I mean, I didn't think he looked very good in that game. Maybe it was the weather and like he's just not as good of a player in those kinds of conditions. I don't know, but I just didn't think that he looked that great, watching him in that game. But regardless, this rookie class, I'd say the earlier round guys have been semi-disappointing or just straight up disappointing. You have JSN, who, he had kind of the contingent upside of like, well, if something happens to Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf, those are 2 players that could elevate JSN if one of them were to get hurt. Jordan Addison's been hit or miss. Obviously, Quentin Johnson's been pretty bad. Zay Flowers has had his moments, but he's been this like low A dot, more sort of gadgety guy at times this season. But then there's some late guys. There's the Puka Nakuas of the world. Jaden Reed, the guy that I remember talking about on your podcast at the beginning of the season. He's looked really, really good. How are you viewing the rookie class in general? Is there anyone watching throughout the season that you think, you don't have to say, oh, I like this guy more than the market does or consensus does, but anyone that's sort of like really caught your eye and you're like, wow, this guy actually might be pretty special and maybe not enough people are talking about him?
So I'm glad you're saying I don't have to say it relative to the market because I don't know what the market thinks about anything. I don't really pay that much attention. And I don't know who people are talking about either. But, I'll just say that what I meant by the rookies when we were talking before is the ones who went too high for fantasy. Yep. Just like we joke about it on my show all the time about like, oh, you say Jahmyr Gibbs is a 4th rounder? Well, then I'm taking him in the 3rd. Oh, yeah? Well, I'm taking him in the 2nd. Like there's a lot of that in the industry. And it leads to, if ADP is like all the rough edges sanded down, right? Everybody's analysis lumped into a ball, different people doing drafts are listening to wildly different people with wildly different opinions. But you got enough voices one-upping, being a hipster and one-upping each other on Bijan Robinson. No, he should be the 2 overall. No, he should be the 1 overall. It becomes for me very easy to just fade them and worry about them next year. Yep. And That's where I mostly feel like my take is with rookies now. Like if there's a rookie that you're going to tell me the ADPs in the first 4 rounds, I'm almost always going to say just fade him. What's the best case for Bijan Robinson? He does Saquon Barkley's rookie season, cool. Then you drafted him, perfect. If he does anything less than that, you messed up. You know,
yeah. What's really interesting, I'm sorry to cut you off. What's really interesting about the rookie and ADPs is, so I publish my draft guide at the beginning of July every year, right? So like July 1st. And when I do that, like I had Robinson and Gibbs as players to target in that guide. The problem was when I wrote that, Jahmyr Gibbs was a late 4th rounder and Bijan Robinson was like a 1-2 turn kind of guy. And then things just shift as the season, as things progress. And that's part of the issue too, is that you literally see the steamrolling and these guys getting boosted in ADP. Yeah. When I was doing FFPC drafts, in late August, Jahmyr Gibbs was like a mid to late 2nd round pick. And so I do think that that's also from like a content creation standpoint too. It's really hard to like keep up with that and let your audience know that things are shifting. This is all based on ADP, but it is to some degree based on ADP, where I'm not drafting Jahmyr Gibbs at the 2-3 turn. I was not drafting him at the 2-3 turn. I still have some Gibbs across my leagues. Got him a lot in Dynasty too. But like, that's a really big piece of this too, is that you do see like perfect evidence this season. You see those early round rookies really get pushed up, especially once like late July and early August starts.
Yeah, it's been happening for a few. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a 1st round pick as a rookie. I'm like, well, okay. You don't know anything about him. You just like the color of his pajamas, like what if you can't play? It turns out he can't play. So a rookie who I don't know what people are talking about, but I'll say that when Michael Wilson had the little blip, the little 3-week window where he got a lot of work and his shoulder wasn't hurt, I was like, ooh, now I kind of see what people were talking about. Like, JJ, I don't do work on rookies. You do all this work and you watch all this college film and you do college metrics and stuff, and bless your heart, I don't do any of it. I have you on my show and you tell me who you like. Yeah. And I have Matt Waldman on my show and I have him tell me who I like. And then I go into the season with a picture in my head, but I go, yeah, probably that picture is going to get, is going to be too hyped. So what people said about Michael Wilson, that the size was great and you won't believe the ball skills. Like, I kind of couldn't believe the ball skills. Like, absolutely amazing. Actually, Arizona has 2 of those guys, and he's not a rookie, but Trey McBride.
Oh, he's been great. Yeah.
Like, it isn't, I don't care about the fantasy production because tight end is a wasteland. He's not a tight end. He's a slot receiver.
Right.
He's like, I don't care about any of it. All I care about is every time I watch a Cardinal game, Trey McBride does a thing that goes, oh, so Kyler Murray should have 3 interceptions. And because 2 of them were thrown to Trey McBride, he only has 1 interception because McBride somehow stole it away from a defensive back. Yeah. Those 2 guys, in terms of like crazy ball skills, like, ooh, I'm really interested.
That's great that you're saying that about Michael Wilson, because I think he's an interesting player in week 16 and 17, only as more of a dart, deeper format. Obviously, if you're in like a 12-team league or whatever, you're in the semifinal. Chances are, unless you're my team and the Ekeler Invitational.
Are you adding him? I think he might be a
maybe I'm gonna add Michael Wilson and use him this weekend against you. No, so I do think though that they have a pretty favorable schedule on paper and such, and matchup wise, it looks pretty good for him. And you have this heel injury from Marquise Brown too that could, Wilson's playing a lot regardless, and he's on the field. He returned from his injury last week, ran a route on a high percentage of dropbacks and such. But I think he's pretty interesting. I didn't love him as a prospect, admittedly, but I've thought the same. I mean, that game against San Francisco was pretty telling to me, and it was definitely an important game for me to then change my opinion a bit on him. I thought he looked pretty good. A follow-up to this, one rookie who's just surging right now from a fantasy perspective is Rashee Rice. Again, a player who I didn't think, I work with Matt a lot throughout the offseason, Matt Harmon, where, like for instance, I remember DMing him and being like, dude, you got to check out Jaden Reed right now. And then he checks out Jaden Reed and he's like, he's a reception perception hero. And then that's when I'm like doubling down on my Jaden Reed take and being like, this guy's going to be good. But regardless, Rashee Rice, Harmon had charted him. He didn't look that great as a route runner. I watched him and felt the same way. Analytically, also wasn't totally there. I mean, there were definitely some negative analytical marks to his profile. Now you watch this Chiefs offense, and they seem to be forcing the ball to him to some degree. There's a lot of manufactured touches, but have you seen some positive things out of him too, at least like developmentally too, from the start of the season to now?
Yeah, like it's a split conversation because on the one hand, why get cute if you've been riding Rishi Rice to where you are and you're just keep using him? Like that's
Right,
not what we're
right.
talking about. We're talking about for the future.
Exactly.
Is he a wide receiver one in the future? I did a film breakdown of him on the show, and I came away feeling like he would have to show a lot more than they've let him show to this point. I don't know that he's once again, it's really hard to prove a negative
Mm-hmm.
when a team doesn't do a thing,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not doing the thing, which is to say they're really not having him run that many routes down the field that they wind up throwing to him. He'll run down the field. They just don't throw it to him that much down there. That the vast majority of his stuff is gadgety and screens and he's kind of a running back with the ball in his hands. Right. He has some Debo to him, and he's not Debo's size, and he's also just not Debo's crazy, like insanity, the level of craziness and the level of risk that Debo Samuel puts his body in. I'm not quite seeing that from anyone because Debo's crazy. So a lot of this production has been manufactured touches. They don't have anybody who can make a play. Please just be like an extension of the run game, or the quote unquote touchdown catch last week against the Patriots is a Jerick McKinnon forward wildcat flip to him on the 1 yard line. It's not really how it usually works, right, for wide receivers. So, I think the worry you have is that he's Cordero Patterson. The worry that he has that he's freaking JaMychal Hasty, that he's who all these guys that were touted as Ty Montgomery, like slashy kind of guys, but don't worry, they're going to always have the ball in their hands, and usually most of them don't. But I don't think it's
Kadarius Toney on the same team.
Right, but different, very different kind of guy.
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah.
If Toney had a brain in his head, he'd be an all-pro.
Tony is much twitchier and does things with his body that I have never seen a wide receiver do. Whereas Rashee Rice is very much the bulldozing yak type. Yeah.
So he's a kid. He played at a small SMU's is not that small, but didn't play elite level of competition. This is all new to him, and this could be absolutely part of a ramp up plan with him. Where like this season, what we're going to give you is a bunch of 5 yard routes, buddy. Like go nuts, learn how to do this, and then next summer we're going to get you on an NFL training program and get you even stronger. And I don't know how they do that, JJ. How do they get themselves stronger? It's so odd how they do that. We'll teach you how to run routes later. But yeah, I the insinuation of your question is like, is this sustainable? And I would say, if this is all he is, it's a very narrow line. It's a very narrow path to being really good for fantasy for the long term. Debo does it, but he's the only one. So I would say I would want him to show more in the future.
Yeah. I mean, to your point too, when teams aren't doing something with a player, yes, there's the idea that, okay, we haven't seen that yet, but at the same time, you also have to look. I'm not saying that coaches are rational by any means, because there's plenty of instances where they're not, but you have to ask yourself, like, okay, is there a reason why he's not, like, look at the Kansas City passing attack right now. Number one,
they sure could use it.
Yeah, exactly. They could use that kind of true X, that true, just number one wideout on that team. And if they're going to use Rashee Rice only in this way or mostly in this way, there's at least that belief in the back of my mind of like, this is a red flag potentially, right? Mm-hmm. Not to say that he's going to bust or anything, but at least watch out for this and don't just look at his production over the last month where he's seeing 30% target shares and he's giving you, fringe wide receiver one production. It's more so like, look at the sustainability of this, because the instant that, Kansas City either goes to free agency or drafts a true number one, what's going to happen to that player? And that's the question that you really should be asking.
I mean, the one thing we know for sure is that there's going to be another big name in the receiving room next year. There has to.
Yeah, there has to be. There has. Or they'll
learned
just
their lesson.
Yeah, or they'll just spend another second round pick on a bad receiver. One of those. One of those two things.
I mean, here's the thing: the path I said in my film review of Rice, the path could be Chris Godwin.
Okay. Yeah.
Like the path could be because Chris Godwin had some of these things too. Chris Godwin had, like, how's he really going to separate? And in the end, the Buccaneers kind of decided he's not gonna, and we don't care. Yeah. He's going to run the middle of the field. Yep. He's going to be a big, strong, tough guy. And against zone, we're going to throw. I mean, God, last week gee, I wonder why Godwin had such a big game last week. Like, not that I predicted it was going to happen, but I can put the pieces together afterwards. Green Bay didn't do anything. They played zone. They played back. They had two linebackers standing in the middle of the field. Chris Godwin went, cool, I'm going to run a hook here, and I'm going to run a hook here, and I'm going to run a hook here. And he caught 11 passes, or whatever it was. Like, so Rice isn't even that yet.
Right.
But maybe there's a way for him to become that, which can be great if you've got an all-time quarterback, which they do.
Yeah. All right, one more question before I let you go. It's the fantasy football playoffs. Like I said, you're about to destroy me in the fantasy football playoffs. Are you going to be managing things any differently in your leagues that you're still alive in? Like, do you like, I get this question all the time. People are like, how should I handle things in the fantasy playoffs? And, to me, there's, like, it's still the same game. You're still playing the same game that you played throughout, but there are some tweaks that you can and potentially make, whether it's start sit or whether it's, through the waiver wire and your roster management.
Right.
So is there anything that you're doing in particular this time of year?
I think the waiver wire is a great point. That's probably the place where I would be. I mean, I didn't have to in the Ekeler league because my team is already perfect, so I didn't have to. But
yeah, meanwhile, the whole waiver transactions list right now is just JJ's Majestic Team, which is the team name in that league, just over and over again, adding like Chris Rodriguez and just these backup running backs everywhere.
It's a 14-team league, we should mention, and also I'm probably not going to win. Like, you keep sandbagging, but yeah, we'll see.
You'll win.
So, there's you just don't need a lot of the extra guys that you were carrying. You don't need an extra tight end. You don't need an extra quarterback. You probably don't need the third receiver who might have broken. You don't need Jameson Williams. You don't, the guys who may. So, like, drop them all and add running back handcuffs. Yeah. Just go down the list, and because they did, even if they weren't hurt for week 16, they could get hurt in week 16, and in week 17, you might have the golden ticket sitting on your bench. I can't tell you which guys that it's going to be, but the usual suspects feel pretty like you should know the names by now, 5 or 6 of them. And I'd say number one is just take a chance on that. That's mandatory. If you're still alive in your playoffs, definitely do that. And then lineup strategy. I don't think there's definitely one way to do it. I think it comes down to what you personally can live with. I say this a lot on my show. We said it before with Stefon Diggs. Like, I can't live with myself if Stefon Diggs goes off on my bench. Definitely. I'll have a bad winter. Like, I won't sleep for a few months. Yeah, I will. Yeah. I don't care that much, but let's pretend I do. I don't want to start whoever, Noah Brown. Hey man, Stefon Diggs has done nothing for a month. Somehow I survived. Noah Brown's the number 1 receiver for Houston. Nobody else is playing. How am I not using Noah Brown? Like, I personally can't do that because I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want Diggs to go off on my bench.
Right.
But I do think it's defensible if somebody else feels like, I'm done with Stefon Diggs. I don't care anymore. If he goes off on my bench, I don't care. I want to give him, I don't believe it's going to happen. I don't think they want to throw it to him. And I'm going to go ahead and pick up the hotter young model and put him in. And I don't think that's wrong. I think what keeps you up? Stefon Diggs being terrible in your lineup again, is that more annoying to you, or Stefon Diggs going off on your bench? For me, the answer is definitely Stefon Diggs going off on my bench.
Yeah.
But if someone else, the answer is not that. If he goes on my bench, I can deal with it. I just can't look at his damn name in my lineup anymore. Like, I respect that take. I don't think it's a wrong take. I don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. Right. Diggs has been terrible. Like, I can't tell you that for sure that it's going to go okay, but that's probably the lineup philosophy question you have to ask yourself. Like, the dude who's frustrating you, who hasn't produced, which is going to tick you off more? Him doing well on your bench, him doing poor in your lineup.
Yeah. I also think, it's the end of the season. So we do have a full season worth of watching these guys, looking at how their usage is and how these teams are using these players. And so you might feel this feeling of, and again, we're not saying to bench Stefon Diggs at all here. But you might feel this feeling of like, Diggs has been bad, I'm going to bench him for some player like Rashee Rice, let's say, or something like that, where, Diggs might be ranked ahead or like you could easily.
I might have Rice ahead.
Yeah,
I don't know this week. I'm not sure.
Right. Exactly. But I'm saying that if you look at the brand name there, right, you're going to say to yourself, It's very easy to say to yourself, oh man, I'm going to bench Stefon Diggs for a rookie wideout who did not a whole lot during the front half of the season. And, that feels really uncomfortable to me. But the way that I would see it is just be logical, right? If you can be logical with your decision making, you've won. Like stuff is going to happen. like I beat Norris last week in that league. Like I said, I shouldn't have beaten him from like a logic perspective. Yeah, right. Like
it's poker.
Yeah, the river's going to come. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Right. Like something crazy is going to happen. You're going to have 94-6 odds, and you're going to have very, very small odds to win a game. And sometimes it just happens, and that's the way that fantasy football is. But it's not going to happen this week between us. You are going to
run down the whole team. Run down my whole team for the folks.
Usually I reverse jinx, Chris. Like usually this would be a reverse.
Trying.
This is not a reverse jinx. This is you are going to absolutely annihilate me. Josh Allen, DK Metcalf, Jacoby Myers, Christian McCaffrey, Isaiah Pacheco, George Kittle, Kenneth Walker, and then you have the Eagles, who I have right now is the top ranked defense this week. So, or at least in that conversation. And then I'm sitting there with Brock Purdy, who's been great, but gets Baltimore this week. And then Jordan Addison, who was great last week. And he gets Detroit at least, maybe a relatively interesting game overall from a scoring perspective. Drake London, who's, in that just horrific offense. There's a bold strategy of mine in this league was to draft 2 Atlanta Falcons with my first 5 picks, because I have Bijan Robinson too. Jonathan Taylor's back, which is nice. Or hopefully back, I should say. I'm crossing my fingers that he's back. And then Isaiah Likely, Jaden Reed might not even play. I'm screwed. I'm beyond screwed, but we'll let this thing play out.
I mean, what a draft. It's very funny because Harmon and Ekeler talk on Harmon's show every week. Mm-hmm. And for weeks they would be, I was told, I don't really listen, but I was told like they would be like, who's this guy? Who's this Harris guy? How's he undefeated? This is annoying. And then they were like, he hasn't made a transaction.
Yeah.
I think for like 9 weeks.
Flawless draft. Yeah.
Yeah, I had no transactions. It was a flawless draft. I don't always have them, but in that league it seems like I did. Well, we'll see. Got two more I got to win.
Yeah. Chris, it was awesome talking to you, man. I wish that we would have been able to do this earlier this season, which is my fault because I should have talked to you earlier in the season about this. But this is the last Perspectives episode of the fantasy football season. And I think capping it off with you and, again, your different perspective and the way that you approach fantasy is going to be great for people to listen to. So why don't you let everyone who doesn't know where they can find you?
You could say it.
You're on Twitter at Harris Football. You can go to harrisfootball.com. Check out the podcast. Definitely, again, just a different approach than what you would probably get with, or what you would definitely be getting with like the Late Round podcast. One of the things that's great too is I'll look at like a Reddit or something, or someone will direct me to a post on Reddit. And one of the cool things that I love to see is when people say that they mesh our processes together, and that when you and I are aligned on a player, that's when it's like, rocket ship emojis, like just go after that guy. So that's really cool to see.
I think you're doing it to yourself, calling yourself a data guy. You're a film guy too.
Yeah.
I mean, as much of what takes more? You got to watch the stupid games. That takes way longer than doing the model. So like, you're a film guy too. Man.
I agree with that. But I would say that I am more confident in a lot of the data analysis that I'm doing, just in general, because that's like where I've always been confident, good at and stuff.
You're good at the football stuff. I would never have had you on my show in the first place if you weren't excellent at the football stuff.
Thank you.
That's what matters most to me, and you are excellent at it. Like we never, like if you and I are having a conversation about player on my show, I never have to go, hold on a second, you're saying something stupid here. Yeah. This is never true. Like you're always grounding it.
Thank you.
You're always like, here's some data for you, but I'm going to ground this in some real football knowledge. You have tons and tons of football knowledge.
Thank you. Maybe it's the thing that we were talking about earlier, where it's just like, you've been doing it for a long time, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can actually, I'm actually not terrible at this. Yeah.
You are good at it.
Well, I appreciate it, man. I really, really loved having chats with you just in general about this nerdy game that we are involved with and making a living off of. But if anyone's not following me on Twitter at LateRoundQB, check out all the stuff over on LateRound.com. And as always, everyone, thank you for tuning in.